Hello, and welcome to a presentation on biological science. Many people get confused when they hear the word biological science. In short, the study areas in biological science is used to analyze evidence and helping to solve crimes or other related events that might require a form of analysis. The fields that are covered under biological science is pathology, anthropology, odontology, entomology, DNA analysis, and forensic hair examination. A pathologist is a medical doctor, but not just a typical medical doctor. They are an individual who studies and diagnoses disease in human corpse. In TV shows, they are well known to be considered the medical examiner that basically performs an autopsy with an outcome of determining the cause of death and the manner of death. So in order to determine the cause of death, there are several different avenues you have to look at. The first thing would be that needs to be done is several photographs need to be taken of all the evidence around the body and the crime scene. A second area the pathologist would perform would be an autopsy. The autopsy is to handle in two folds. They do it for the external first and then the internal examination secondly. The autopsy, they cover different areas, finding evidence ranging from the following: a classification of trauma, gunshot wounds, electrical trauma, liver, mortis, and pechigo, which is to relate it to the eyes that you can find hemorrhaging in. Once the evidence has all been collected for the external evaluation, then it is time to perform internal evaluation, which requires for the pathologists to actually collect the internal organs inside the body, and they do it in either two different ways. They either remove all the organs altogether or they do it individually, which is known as the Virchow method. But they go through and they examine each one of the organs individually, looking for signs of drugs, toxicology, or if they need to send the information off to a toxicology, that's when the information is submitted to another lab for further evaluation. Basically, once the autopsy has been performed, from the internal and external of the organs being collected, being weighed in, and being analyzed as well, then we finally come to the conclusion of the manner of death. Once the evidence is all collected and submitted to the proper areas of analysis, the reasoning of death and an autopsy report will be provided and announce the time of death. One of the areas that I find so fascinating underneath the biological science area is actually the anthropology area. I find what they do is really amazing. But basically, it is the study of human remains. They have the ability to determine by collecting skeletons, remains, if the individual is actually a male or if they are female. They can tell you the age of the individual. They even have the ability to do facial reproduction, which is really interesting. And this area actually takes me back to a time when a TV show was actually hit on air on September 13, 2005. And it was called Bones. And basically, the TV show was about a forensic anthropologist and a forensic archaeologist who was working with FBI on a mystery cases of human remains. What I didn't understand at that time is when this TV show came out, I really thought it was kind of really far-fetched that we even had the ability to actually look at a skeleton, a bone, a remains that is found, and be able to say, oh yeah, this is their ankle, or this is their toes, or this is their foot. But an anthropology has the ability to do that. They're such an individual skilled level of forensics that I find to be very interesting. It is really important also to note that whenever remains are found, that the site that they are found on, that it is treated with vital care and the remains must be removed properly and not to destroy any evidence. I'm probably not pronouncing this word correct, but odontology, which basically is the individual who has the ability to identify an individual by their teeth. This area of study is important because teeth are made of enamel and it is the hardest substance of a body and can survive severe conditions and still be vital for analysis if it's been out there for 20 years. Teeth marks can also be matched back to individuals, which I remember reading that what actually caught the famous Ted Bundy was the fact that he actually bit an individual on their arm and they were able to match his teeth marks back to the bite marks. So even though I can't say the word correct, teeth analysis is really important and can tie people back, and it can also tell you from looking at a person's dental and so forth like that, their actual identity. Okay, so this is probably another word that I'm going to probably butcher, but entomology. And basically it is insects. It's the type of insects that are found on human remains. And the importance of this information is the fact that the proper detection of evidence can tell you the life cycles of an insect, which means it can tell you the time frame in which an individual might have been discarded out into a field, for an example, or over by a river. It can tell you that in case you come upon a scene and you find a body, and you hear a lot of times on TV they say, well, the crime didn't actually happen here. So it makes you wonder, well, if it didn't happen here, what all did they use to actually analyze where it took place? One of the areas that they analyze is by if there's insects on there. An insect can tell you the actual location because I guess insects are only at certain areas at certain times of the year. It's also the type of soil. They say that if you're removing a body, to also make sure to get a soil type, because then that way you have the soil contents can tell you where that soil is actually located. And it also, insects help determine post-mortem. Serology and blood stain pattern analysis. What exactly is that? Well, basically, serology is a collection of body fluids: blood, semen, saliva, and urine. And when you are testing these types of areas, there's only two ways to test them. Presumptive, which means highly sensitive but not specific for a particular substance. Confirmatory, which is test positive for a substance in question and only that of that substance. But let's go back for just a minute and let's look at what we just talked about, the collection of body fluids. Let's use, for example, there's an individual who has been accused of raping an individual. The fastest way for a person possibly to eliminate themselves from being even considered a suspect is to provide possibly a semen or saliva test, maybe even a blood example. I don't see where a urine analysis would help in that at all. So they're looking for something very specific. So that would be one of the ways of testing. The confirmatory way of testing, I'm looking at that as though if they do a urine test, that let's say that somebody possibly is doing or smoking drugs or weed or whatever, and they're looking to test them, they take a urine sample, test it, and say, yeah, you can tell that you've got marijuana in your systems. So that would be the more isolated to one particular area. DNA analysis. What a big subject, big area to cover. However, since this is a very short presentation, we can't cover all the vital parts to do with DNA. But basically, the area of study of DNA is the nature of DNA, the variations of the genes, the DNA typing and DNA typing of the PCR product, the comparison of a DNA of samples. All of this is so crucial whenever you're analyzing someone's DNA, because DNA actually, if you think about it in today's society, can convict a person who has been let go of a crime that was 20 years old and now can come back and we can get a DNA analysis, do a comparison against the evidence in custody, and we can now actually charge somebody with a crime. Or we can do it just the opposite. We see individuals who are actually been falsely accused and they're put in prison and they've been in there for years and years, and all of a sudden they're going, you need to do a DNA analysis, and we do one and come to find out they're not the right individual that's been placed behind bars. So DNA is really huge. DNA is used to help solve rapes, murders, etc. But finding evidence of an individual's DNA on clothing or items left behind after performing a DNA comparison is what types an individual to the actual crime. So DNA is a huge area that, again, like I said, in a small presentation can't even come close to being talked about the value of what it is. So I went a little bit out of sequence here. Whenever I was supposed to be talking about bloodstain patterns, I just now actually am doing it. The purpose of analyzing bloodstain is to determine the point of origin and the documenting bloodstains at the scene and understanding the importance of the following, like the passive blood stains that you see, like clots, drops, flows, and pooling. There's transfer, which means you see wipes, swipes, patterns, transfers. Projected and impact would leave fly spots, voids, as skeletized stains. It's important to understand each and every one of those because it lets you know at the point of contact or at the point of action what actually took place. You know, there is currently a really famous individual who has moved over to another country from the US that I just recently saw on the TV show, where he was actually committed to the crime of killing his wife, but then he was found not guilty after all because the way that the blood dripped or the way the blood was determined actually allowed him to be free, because one of the sides were actually detecting and saying that the reason why this person was hunched over and the way they had the dripping the way that they were was because their husband had killed them and they were facing down, the blood was dripping all over. Where another one said because there was splatter that was up on the wall, and the defense, what they said was that the husband came behind the individual and picked her up, and whenever he picked her up, the blood that was on her went splattering on the walls. And because there couldn't be an actual determination of that blood pattern, the individual actually was let off. He is now living in another country, and he is actually famous in the other country, but the United States actually wants him to come back because they have enough evidence now to actually convict him of the actual crime. So bloodstain patterns is another area of biological science that is very important to make sure that when we study it, analyze it, and present it, that we are having the ability to back up and testify in the court of law, because it can determine whether somebody is found guilty or not guilty. Forensic hearing examinations is pretty much self-explanatory. Examination can determine if a hair found at a crime scene is human or an animal. Hair is one of the most recovered types of evidence from a crime scene. Hair has good forensic evidence because it is sturdy and can survive for many years, and they carry a biological information, meaning that it basically ties back to an individual. If you pluck one of my hairs, compared it to one of my friends down the road, you're going to find that we both have different type of pigments within our hair, or follicles, or I believe that's what they were called, where our hair is actually growing. There's different stages and stuff that you can tell from hair collection. DNA can be extracted from the hairs, which is another way a lot of people that's been put behind bars might be getting released, is because there is a hair that was found at a scene. And now they're able to do a DNA analysis and find out that the person that was convicted of the crime actually isn't the person that they should have convicted in the first place, or vice versa. Items that are investigated is, when it comes to the hair, is the pigment granules, cortex fusion, and a void of the bodies. Again, like I said, hair samples are found all the time at crime scenes, and really one of the first things that they have to determine is whether or not it's human hair or if it's some form of an animal. Well, this is the end of my presentation for biological science. Please remember, evidence is vital to a crime scene, and experts are used to analyze the evidence found and could be called into a court of law to testify to their findings. Remember to always take photographs at every stage before, during, and after of handling of evidence. Thank you.